Branch third. A cautionary direction, be strong in the Lord. In this we have a cautionary direction. Having exhorted the saints at Ephesus, and in them all believers, to a holy resolution and courage in their warfare, lest this should be mistaken, and beget in them an opinion of their own strength for the battle, the apostle leads them out of themselves for this strength, even to the Lord, be strong in the Lord. From whence observe. The saint's strength lies in the Lord. Doctrine, that the Christian's strength lies in the Lord, not in himself. The strength of the general in other hosts lies in his troops. He flies, as a great commander once said to his soldiers, upon their wings, if their feathers be clipped, their power broken, he is lost, but in the army of saints, the strength of every saint, yet, of the whole host of saints, lies in the Lord of hosts. God can overcome his enemies without their hands, but they cannot so much as defend themselves without his arm. It is one of God's names, the strength of Israel, 1 Sa. 15:29. He was the strength of David's heart, without him this valiant worthy, that could, when held up in his arms, defy him that defied a whole army, behaves himself strangely for fear, at a word or two that dropped from the Philistine's mouth. He was the strength of his hands, he taught his fingers to fight, and so he is the strength of all his saints in their war against sin and Satan. Some propound a question, whether there be a sin committed in the world in which Satan hath not a part. But if the question were, whether there be any holy action performed without the special assistance of God concurring, that is resolved, without me ye can do nothing, Junior. 15:5. Thinking strength of God, not that we are sufficient of ourselves, to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God, 2 Co 3. 5. We apostles, we saints that have habitual grace, yet this lies like water at the bottom of a well, which will not ascend with all our pumping till God pour in his exciting grace, and then it comes. To will is more than to think, to exert our will into action more than both. These are of God, it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure, PMA 13. He makes the heart new, and having made it fit for heavenly motion, setting every wheel, as it were, in its right place, then he winds it up by his actuating grace, and sets it on going, the thoughts to stir, the will to move and make towards the holy object presented, yet here the chariot is set, and cannot ascend the hill of action till God puts his shoulder to the wheel. To will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. Rota.is. God is at the bottom of the ladder, and at the top also, the author and finisher, yet, helping and lifting the soul at every round, in his ascent to any holy action. Well, now the Christian is set on work, how long will he keep close to it? Alas, poor soul, no longer than he is held up by the same hand that empowered him at first he hath soon wrought out the strength received, and therefore to maintain the tenure of a holy course, there must be renewing strength from heaven every moment, which David knew, and therefore when his heart was in as holy a frame as ever he felt it, and his people by their free will offering declared the same, yet even then he prays, that God would keep this forever in the imagination of the thoughts of the heart of his people, and prepare their heart unto him. 1 Chxxix. 18. He adored the mercy that made them willing, and then he implores his further grace to strengthen them, and tie a knot, that these precious pearls newly strung on hearts might not slip off. The Christian, when fullest of divine communications, is but a glass without a foot, he cannot stand, or hold what he hath received, any longer than God holds him in his strong hand. Therefore, Christ, when bound for heaven, and ready to take his leave of his children, bespeaks his Father's care of them in his absence. Father, keep them, Jn. 17n, as if he had said, they must not be left alone, they are poor shiftless children, that can neither stand nor go without help, they will lose the grace I have given them, and fall into those temptations which I kept them from while I was with them, if they be out of thy eye or arms but one moment, and therefore, Father, keep them. Again, consider the Christian as addressing himself to any duty of God's worship, still his strength is in the Lord. 1 Prayer. Would he pray? Where will he find materials for his prayer? Alas, he knows not what he should pray for as he ought. Rovui. 26. Let him alone, and he will soon pray himself into some temptations or other, and cry for that which it were cruelty in God to give, and therefore God puts words in our mouths. Take words with you and say, Ho 14. Too well, Still Waters Revival Books, all rights reserved, www.puritandownloads.com. 20. The Christian in complete armor. The Christian's strength lies in the Lord. 21. Now he hath words put into his mouth. Alas, they will freeze in his very lips, if he hath not some heart-heating affections to thaw the tap. And where shall this fire be had? Not a spark to be found on his own hearth, except it be some strange fire of natural desires, which will not serve. Whence then must the fire come to thaw the iciness of the heart, but from heaven? The Spirit, he must stretch himself upon the soul, as the prophet on the child, and then the soul will come to some kindly warmth and heavenly heat in its affections. The Spirit must groan, and then the soul will groan. He helps us to these sighs and groans which turn the sails of prayer. He dissolves the heart, and then it, i.e. prayer, bursts out of the heart by groans of the lips, by heavenly rhetoric, out of the eyes as from a floodgate with tears. Yet further, now the creature is enabled to wrestle with God in prayer. What will he get by all this? Suppose he be weak in grace, is he able to pray himself strong, or corruption weak? No, this is not to be found in prayer, as an act of the creature. This drops from heaven also. In the day that I cried, thou answeredst me, and I strengthenedst me with strength in my soul. PS. 38. 3. David received it in duty. Bttt had it not from his duty, but from his find. He did not pray himself strong, but God strengthened him in his prayer. 2. Hearing the word. Well, cast your eyes once more upon the Christian, as engaging another ordinance of hearing the word preached. The soul's strength to hear the word is from God. He opens the heart to attend, AC 16. 14. Yet, he opens the understanding of the saint to receive the word, so as to conceive what it means. It is like Samson's riddle, which we cannot unfold without his heifer. He opens the womb of the soul to conceive by it, as the understanding to conceive of it, that the barren soul becomes a joyful mother of children. David sat for half a year under the public lectures of the law, and the womb of his heart shut up, till Nathan comes, and God with him, and now is the time of life. He conceives presently, yet, and brings forth in the same day, falls presently into the bitter pangs of sorrow for his sins, which went not over till he had cast them forth in that sweet 51st Psalm. Why should this one word work more than all the former, but that God now struck in with his word, which he did not before? He is therefore said to teach his people to profit, is. Zivwi. 17. He sits in heaven that hate hearts. When God's Spirit, who is the headmaster, shall call a soul from his usher to himself, and say, Soul, you have not gone the way to receive by hearing the word. Thus and thus conceive of such a truth, improve such a promise. Presently the eyes of his understanding open, and his heart burns within him while he speaks to him. Thus you see the truth of this point, that the Christian's strength is in the Lord. Now we shall give some demonstrations or reasons. Why the saint's strength is laid VP in God. Reason first. The first reason may be taken from the nature of the saints and their grace. Both are creatures, they and their grace also. Now 1. It is in the very nature of the creature to depend on God its Maker, both for being and operation. Can you conceive an accident to be out of its subject, whiteness out of the wall, or some other subject? It is as impossible that the creature should be, or act without strength from God. This to be, act in and of himself, is so incommuni one in est de esse creatura. Cable a property of the deity, that he cannot impart it to his creature. God is and there is none besides him. When God made the world, it is said indeed he ended his work, that is, of creation, he made no new species and kinds of creatures more, but to this day he hath not ended his work of providence. My Father worketh hitherto, saith Christ, Jr. v. 17, that is, in preserving and empowering what he hath made with strength to be an act, and therefore he is said to hold our souls in life. Works of art, which man makes, when finished, may stand some time without the workman's help, as the house, when the carpenter that made it is dead, but God's works, both of nature and grace, are never off his hand, and therefore as the Father is said to work hitherto for the preservation of the works of nature, so the Son, to whom is committed the work of redemption, he tells us, worketh also. Neither ended he his work when he rose again, any otherwise than his Father did in the work of creation. God made an end of making, so Christ made an end of purchasing mercy, grace, and glory for believers, by once dying, and as God rested at the end of the creation, so he, when he had wrought eternal redemption, and by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high, I3. But he ceaseth not to work by his intercession with God for us, and by his Spirit in us for God, whereby he upholds his saints, their graces, and comforts in life, without which they would run to ruin. Thus we see as grace is a creature, the Christian depends on God for his strength. But further, reason second. The Christian's grace is not only a creature, but a weak creature, conflicting with enemies stronger than itself, and therefore cannot keep the field without an auxiliary strength from heaven. The weakest goes to the wall, if no succor comes in. Grace in this life is but weak, like a king in the cradle, which gives advantage to Satan to carry on his plots more strongly to the disturbance of this young king's reign in the soul, yet, he would soon make an end of the war in the ruin of the believer's grace, did not heaven take the Christian into protection. It is true indeed, grace, wherever it is, hath a principle in itself that makes it desire and endeavor to preserve itself according to its strength, but being overpowered must perish, except assisted by God, as fire in greenwood, which deads and damps the part kindled, will in time go out, except blown up, or more fire put to that little, so will grace in the heart. God brings his grace into the heart by conquest now, as in a conquered city, though some yield and become true subjects to the conqueror, yet others plot how they may shake off this yoke, and therefore it requires the same power to keep, as was to win it at first. The Christian hath an unregenerate part, that is discontented at this new change in the heart, and disdains as much to come under the sweet government of Christ's scepter, as the Sodomites that Lot should judge them. What, this fellow, a stranger, control us? And Satan heads this mutinous rout against the Christian, so that if God should not continually reinforce this his new planted colony in the heart, the very natives, I mean corruptions, that are left, would come out of their dens and holes where they lie lurking, and eat up the little grace the holiest on earth hath. It would be as bread to these devourers. Reason third. A third demonstration may be taken from the Grand Distill Waters Revival books, all rights reserved, www.puritandownloads.com. 22. The Christian in complete armor. Sign which God propounds to himself in the saints' salvation, yet, in the transaction of it from first to last. And that is twofold. 1. God woved bring his saints to heaven in such a way as might be most expressive of his dear love and mercy to them. 2. He would so express his mercy and love to them, as might rebound back to him in the highest advance of his own glory possible. Now how becoming this is to both, that saints should have all their ability for every step they take in the way to heaven, will soon appear. 1. Design. God would bring his saints to heaven in such a way as might be most expressive of his dear love and mercy to them. This way of communicating strength to saints, gives a double accent to God's love and mercy. 1. It distills a sweetness into all the believer hath or doth, when he finds any comfort in his bosom, any enlargement of heart in duty, any support under temptations, to consider whence came all these, what friend sends them in. They come not from my own cistern, or any creature's. 0. It is my God that hath been here, and left his sweet perfume of comfort behind him in my bosom. My God that hath unawares to me filled my sails with the gales of his Spirit, and brought me off the flats of my own deadness, where I lay aground. 0. It is his sweet Spirit that held my head, stayed my heart in such an affliction and temptation, or else I had gone away in a fainting fit of unbelief. How can this choose but endear God to a gracious soul? His succor coming so immediately from heaven, which would be lost, if the Christian had any strength to help himself, though this stock of strength came at first from God. Which, think you, speaks more love and condescent, for a prince to give a pension to a favourite, on which he may live by his own care, or for this prince to take the chief care upon himself, and come from day to day to this man's house, and look into his cupboard and see what provision he hath, what expense he is at, and so constantly to provide for the man from time to time. Possibly some proud spirit that likes to be his own man, or loves his means better than his prince, would prefer the former, but one that is ambitious to have the heart and love of his prince would be ravished with the latter. Thus God doth with his saints. The great God comes and looks into their cupboard, and sees how they are laid in, and sends in accordingly as he finds them. Your heavenly Father knows you have need of these things, and you shall have them. He knows you need strength to pray, to hear, to suffer for him, and, in ipsa hord dabiter, in the very hour it will be given. 2. This way of God's dealing with his saints adds to the fullness and stability of their strength. Were the stock in our own hands, we should soon prove broken merchants. God knows we are but leaking vessels. When fullest we could not hold it long, and therefore to make all sure, he sets us under the streamings forth of his strength, and a leaking vessel under a cock gets what it loseth. Thus we have our leakage supplied continually. This was the provision God made for Israel in the wilderness. He clave the rock, and the rock followed them. They had not only a draught at present, but it ran in a stream after them, so that you hear no more of their complaints for water. This rock was Christ. Every believer hath Christ at his back, following him with strength as he goes. For every condition and trial, one flower with the root is worth many in a posy, which though sweet yet do not grow. The Christian's strength lies in the Lord. 23. But wither as we wear them in our bosoms. God's strength as the root keeps our grace lively, without which, though as orient as Adam's was, it would die. 2. Design. The second design God hath in his saints' happiness is, that he may so express his mercy and love to them as may rebound back to him in the highest advance of his own glory therein. Epii 12, which is fully attained in this way of empowering saints, by a strength not of their own, but of their God his sending, as they are put to expense. Had God given his saints a stock of grace to have set up with and left them to the improvement of it, he had been magnified indeed, because it was more than God did owe the creature, but he had not been omnified as now, when not only the Christian's first strength to close with Christ is from God, but he is beholden still to God for the exercise of that strength, in every action of his Christian course. As a child that travels in his father's company, all is paid for, but his father carries the purse, not himself, so the Christian's shot is discharged in every condition, but he cannot say this I did, or that I suffered, but God wrought all in me and for me. The very comb of pride is cut here. No room is left for any self-exalting thoughts. The Christian cannot say, that I am a saint is mercy, but being a saint, that my faith is strong. This is the child of my own care and watchfulness. Alas, poor Christian! Who kept thine eye waking, and stirred up thy care? Was not this the offspring of God as well as thy faith at first? No saint shall say of heaven when he comes there, this is heaven, which I have built by the power of my might. No. Jerusalem above is a city whose builder and maker is God. Every grace, yet, degree of grace, is a stone in that building, the top stone whereof is laid in glory, where saints shall more plainly see, how God was not only founder to begin, but benefactor also to finish the same. The glory of the work shall not be crumbled and piecemealed out, some to God and some to the creature, but all entirely paid in to God, and he acknowledged all in all use or application. Use first. Is the Christian's strength in the Lord, not in himself? Surely then the Christless person must needs be a poor impotent creature, void of all strength and ability of doing anything of itself towards its own salvation. If the ship launched, rigged, and with her sails spread cannot stir, till the wind come fair and fill them, much less can the timber that lies in the carpenter's yard hew and frame itself into a ship. If the living tree cannot grow except the root communicate its sap, much less can a dead rotten stake in the hedge, which hath no root, live of its own accord. In a word, if a Christian, that hath his spiritual life of grace, cannot exercise this life without strength from above, then surely one void of this new life, dead in sins and trespasses, can never be able to beget this in himself, or concur to the production of it. The state of unregenerate is a state of impotency. When we were without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly, Rov. E. And as Christ found the lump of mankind covered with the ruins of their lapsed estate, no more able to raise themselves from under the weight of God's wrath which lay upon them, than one buried under the rubbish of a fallen house is to free himself of that weight without help, so the Spirit finds sinners in as helpless a condition, as unable to repent, or believe on Christ for salvation. Still Waters Revival Books, all rights reserved, www.puritandownloads.com. 24. The Christian in complete armor. As they were of themselves to purchase it. Confounded therefore forever be the language of those sons of pride, who cry up the power of nature, as if man with his own brick and slime of natural abilities were able to rear up such a bemelding, whose top may reach heaven itself. It is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but God that sheweth mercy. Eo. 9:16. God himself hath scattered such Babel builders in the imagination of their hearts, who raiseth this spiritual temple in the souls of men, not by might, nor by a power of their own, but by his Spirit, that so grace might be proclaimed before it forever. And therefore, if any yet in their natural estate would become wise to salvation, let them first become fools in their own eyes, and renounce their carnal wisdom, which perceives not the things of God, and beg wisdom of God, who giveth and upbraideth not. If any man would have strength to believe, let them become weak, and die to their own, for by strength shall no man prevail. LSA 2:9. Use second. Doth the Christian's strength lie in God, not in himself? This may forever keep the Christian humble, when most enlarged in duty, most assisted in his Christian course. Remember, Christian, when thou hast thy best suit on, who made it, who paid for it? Thy grace, thy comfort is neither the work of thy own hands, nor the price of thy own desert. Be not, for shame, proud of another's cost. That assistance will not long stay which becomes a nurse to thy pride. Thou art not lord of that assistance thou hast. Thy Father is wise, who when he alloweth thee most for thy spiritual maintenance, even then keeps the law in his own hands, and can soon curb thee, if thou growest wanton with his grace. Walk humbly therefore before thy God, and husband well that strength thou hast, remembering that it is borrowed strength. Who will waste what he begs, one or who will give that beggar that spends idly his alms? When thou hast most, thou canst not be long from thy God's door. And how canst thou look him on the face for more, who hast embezzled what thou hast received? Branch forth. An amplification of the direction, and in the power of high might. In this branch we have an encouraging amplification annexed to the exhortation, in these words, and in the power of his might, where a twofold inquiry is requisite for the explication of the phrase. First, what these words import, the power of his might. Second, what it is to be strong in the power of his might. First, what these words import, the power of his might. It is an Hebraism, and imports nothing but his mighty power, like that phrase, EPIE, to the praise of the glory of his grace, that is, to the praise of his glorious grace. And his